We're going to take a break. We're going to, I think we're going to have some, I know we're going to have some very prominent speakers. Would like you to know that we'll be over at the table here, and if you care to browse by, we do have copies of the CD with the Romaine Tenney song and the Sleeping Sentinel, and several other recordings we've done over the years. So we'd like to see it. If you like our music and want to know where we're playing, we do perform all around Vermont and New England. You can sign up for our newsletter list. So we're going to yield to the speaker portion of the program today, and we'll probably do a few more tunes for you at the end of the day.
All right, you guys, how about a nice big thank you for the Sky View Boys? I've been hearing about this guy forever. I'm so glad I finally got to hear and meet them in person.
Good idea.
First of all, let me just say welcome to the Weathersfield Proctor Library. I'm Nancy McMenemy. I'm one of the trustees and also the crazy person who thought I would throw this party together for Mr. Romaine Tenney. It started a number of years ago. Our trustees and fundraisers host an summer evening with friends up at the Center Church, and I think it was 2 years in a row or a year and skipped a year, two of the speakers spoke about Romaine. One of our speakers is here today, and one of our speakers isn't. Unfortunately, he's on vacation, but before he went on vacation, I actually got to record an interview with him, and he laid out where everything was for me, and the video is running inside the library, so if you need a moment away from the sun, the hot sun and everything, you can go ahead in the library. We also have a wonderful video that Nora Jacobson filmed a few years ago in there, and I know people are interested. She's over here. Nora, you want to raise your hand? So if you want to get a copy of that video, ask her how to do it. She has some, but she didn't bring them today, unfortunately. So anyway, just a few housekeeping things. First, welcome family, friends, town folk, anybody that remembers Romaine, anybody that wasn't around like myself who is just really interested in this amazing man. I have to thank the town of Weathersfield because they gave us a grant from the bottle return bill to help put this event on. Also, the Friends of Weathersfield Proctor Library paid for our awesome horse cart, which is Peter and Donna Hutkins from the Smokeshire Hilltop Farm with Betsy and Sarah, those fabulous horses over there. I hope you guys get a chance. I think because there's so many people here and the haul up, it may be tough, we might ask just the drivers that park their vehicles on the return trip to take the cart right up, and then you can come back and pick up your passengers. Just because the horses are going to have a hard time, I think, in the heat and the weight going up that hill. I also want to thank the Historical Society. Patty Houghton-Harrison let me in, and Ginger Wimberg let me into their archives so I could find some of the old photos that we also have on a video loop that's going on inside the library. They have a great collection of photos and stories and just anything you want to know about Romaine. Some of the stuff is inside the building. And also I want to thank, too, the Tenney family that turned out. I'm so glad that you guys are still around, and I'm glad that you're sharing this day with us because, like I said, he sounds like he was an amazing man, and as a photographer and a quasi-reporter, interviewer person, I think he was a person that I really, really would have loved to have met and just sat down with and walked around and played with the horses and the dogs. Spot sounded like an amazing dog. I would have loved to have too. I see some people nodding their heads, going, yeah. So I don't want to dwell on September 11th and September 12th of 1964. I would rather celebrate September 6th, which I believe is his birthday. Don't believe what you read in Wikipedia, because I think they have it listed as the 13th, which is not his birthday. So, lesson for kids here, when you do your homework, don't go to Wikipedia, because it may be wrong. And in this case, it is wrong. I think in 1964, I was a little kid living down country, so I had no idea what was going on. But I think at that time in September, I think we lost a really good person in town. And from all the accounts that I've read and all the people that I've spoken to, it sounds like this was just a one-of-a-kind Vermonter, and it's a shame that we had to lose him on that weekend. But he did it his way, and that's just the kind of guy he was, I guess. And I'm glad that we're all here honoring his memory, and hopefully he's still floating around thinking, wow, these people are crazy, what are they all doing here? He's had many ballads and many poems written about him, the most recent by the Sky Blue Boys, and I'm just glad that people are thinking about him, and I'm hoping this is something we can continue, sort of like they do in the Hemingway days, but not as goofy in Key West. We're a little bit more respectful, I think, here than the crazies in Key West. But I would like to see this continue, and hopefully it's something we can do maybe on an annual basis or biannual basis, but I just don't want this person to leave our memories. That's pretty much all I had to say. If you have any questions, hopefully our program, I hope everybody got a chance to get one, and if you didn't, we can make more kind of a little commemorative take home for you, just to remind you about what a beautiful house this was. What I've heard is people used to drive for miles and miles and take pictures of it because it was so unique. With the gingerbread and the diamond windows. In fact, our Weathersfield Century 1 book is open on the table over there, a picture of one of the window panes. And I know everybody was like jonesing for those windows when they were going to take the house. And I think Romaine just said, nope, they're going with me. So I think he made a good decision. So a little bit about today. We had our awesome horse rides from Peter and Donna. Thank you very much. And we had the Sky Blue Boys. They'll probably continue a little bit. And now I'd like to open it up to we have a couple of guest speakers. Our first up will be Howard Coffin, who is a Vermont historian, and he's been working with Antoinette Jacobson and the family to try to get a plaque put up at the Exit 8 Park and Ride. Mr. Coffin?
This is not as long as it looks. It's too warm a day. Can you hear me? I struggled to get here this morning up at 7 with 2 flat tires. But here we are, and it's a pleasure. When the Civil War ended, 30,000 farms existed in Vermont. So the boys who had served had almost 1 farm per soldier to come home to. Today, the number of Vermont farms is somewhat hard to determine. Various agencies have different numbers. But the number of traditional farms, small Vermont dairy farms, is way down to less than 700. Vermont farm life, with which this state still identifies, and Vermont life tries to make us believe still thrives, is nearly gone. I grew up in Woodstock, but my mother came from South Pomfret, a very different community. When I was a boy, my maternal grandparents, Hal and Anna Jolson, had retired to a small farm in South Pomfret. Many nights I went to my grandparents to help Graham on his small farm. I would get up there in the evening and Graham and I would listen to maybe 2 or 3 innings of the Red Sox game, but then at 8 o'clock because we got up at 4:30. I would go out to the barn to get eggs. Hens nested in the haymound. Graham would be cooking on the wood stove. Gramp would bring in the wood from the woodshed, stacked so carefully out there you'd think a master mason had done it. Gram would cook salt pork in the iron skillet over the stove and then put fried eggs in there, cook the toast over the open fire with her homemade jam. It was absolutely delicious. And then when the grass had dried, Gramp and I went out to sigh. I would chop away at the hay, not very efficiently, but Gramp, I think like Romaine Tenney, was a master with the scythe. He could cut a field so it looked like a lawnmower had done it. And when he had to sharpen, that whetstone made a sound that sang down the valley. It was beautiful. And then in the afternoon we'd work in the garden, and then up on the Oak Ridge to hunt hedgehogs, because he got 25 cents for a pair of ears, and every cent counted back in those days. On Sunday we went to Gramp and Gram's for supper. Chicken, biscuits, and gravy, all the aunts and uncles and cousins. And after supper, Gram sat at the piano, Uncle Alan played the guitar, and Gramp played the harmonica. He was the best in Windsor County. He could even play Devil's Dance. And we all sang the old songs. Red Wing, Old Zip Coon, Tenting Tonight, Red River Valley. Those evenings were magical. The happy times of the happy people. Dairy farming, of course, was a tough way of life. Farm life, not much money. But my grandparents and their friends seemed happy, and they were kind, and their children were good, and they were kind. It was a way of life Romaine Tenney understood and was a part of. And then the Vermont farm life began to die. It coincided with the arrivals of the interstate highways and the requirements that farmers must use expensive bulk tanks. When the interstates came to Vermont, many of the things our farms provided for profit suddenly came in at high speed in big trucks from far away, and most of what they brought was frozen. 44,000 miles of interstate were built in America. Dwight Eisenhower is credited, and of course he did it for military reasons, so that soldiers and weapons could be quickly moved to points of danger anywhere in this country. The Cold War was on. It was progress. I hate that word. Eisenhower, after all, had been the Allied Supreme Commander in Europe. How could he do any wrong? We tend to canonize politicians. Interstate 91, of course, came up the Connecticut River. It was always said that it was a battle between two U.S. Senate titans, Vermont's George D. Aiken and New Hampshire's Norris Cotton, for which state would get the big road. And Aiken, we were told, won. And we got it here, up the Vermont side. Aiken Vermonters believed could do no wrong. But I wonder, did Cotton let Aiken win so New Hampshire didn't have to pay the road maintenance, the plowing of a super highway less than a mile away from New Hampshire? I don't remember Mr. Tenney's death. When it happened, I was a private first class at Fort Hood, Texas. The 2nd Armored Division was just standing down from an alert, all ready at the Fort Hood airfield with ammunition to head for Southeast Asia. Tonkin Gulf had happened, and Lyndon Johnson, based on a lie about the North Vietnamese, was going into Vietnam whole hog. The result would be a war producing 1.3 million deaths, 85,000 of them children. The canonization of Johnson now seems well underway. It was, of course, at the same time, on an early fall night, that Interstate 91 brought about the death of Romaine Tenney. But I didn't hear of it until 2 years later when I went to work for the Rutland Herald and spent the summer of '66 at the Herald Springfield Bureau, futilely trying, and you locals will understand this, to substitute for Barney Crozier. It was impossible. That year somebody told me about Mr. Tenney. And I have never passed or used the Ascutney exit since without thinking of him hundreds on hundreds of times. He was one of my heroes. He died in the onslaught of what may have been a great mistake. Certainly from the point of view of global warming, the interstates have been disasters. And from a conservation perspective, how many millions of acres did they destroy? How many farms? And every day the slaughter of the innocents goes on. What chance do deer and coyotes and squirrels and rabbits, even bear and moose, have in traffic that now seems to travel legally at 80 miles per hour? In contemplating what happened that night in 1964, I found some words of Robert Frost that seemed to fit. Frost, probably the best of all poets dealing with the New England farm. He was a farmer himself, of course. From his poem Directives. Back out of all of this now, too much for us. Back in a time made simple by the loss of detail, burned, dissolved, and broken off, like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. There is a house that is no more a house, upon a farm that is no more a farm. And from Frost to Tramps and Mud Time, only where love and need are one, and the work, is play for mortal stakes. Is the deed ever really done for heaven and the future's sake? I think I would like to know what Romaine Tenney's final thoughts were up in his farmhouse, alone in the soft, non-electrical light, having put the dog out. I suspect they had to do with having come to the end of all the things he loved. Did he think of making a statement for the ages? Maybe. I don't know. But he did. There needs to be remembrance of him because he was a good man, a good friend, neighbor, and because he was a Vermont farmer who personified the best of the Vermont farm ethic character, as I recall it. But also we need to remember him because we in this country need to think and learn to ponder progress. Someone should have thought about pointing an interstate highway a half degree this way or that for one good man and one good farm. And does anybody think about the real long-term results of the ripping, tearing monstrosities we loose on the world, like interstates, Mideast wars, and nuclear weapons? Then there's atomic plants, giant wind towers. Some good people recently were chastised by Vermont's alternate power guru, who seems to be perceived as incapable of doing wrong, chastised for an opposing giant wind. That power blasts and destroys mountaintops, ridgetops, threatens our best long-term strength as a state and our scenic beauty. Let us not accept but question, challenge. What was done to Romaine Tenney was wrong. What he did on that long ago night, it now seems, was utterly right. Maybe a marker of where his farm stood will cause some people to think, make it more difficult for the powerful to act when they are misguided. Let there be a means to memorialize this man. Perhaps small farm Vermont died with him. You know, Vermont is nowhere near as beautiful as it was when I was young. Our state is now 75% wooded, then it was 75% cleared. Oh, so beautiful it was, green fields climbing far up the hills, with cattle grazing, barns in good repair. Someone has said that the Ascutney exit is the saddest place on all the interstates. But perhaps it can become one of the most important places. There a man died alone in his beloved house, with another Vermont high autumn coming on. How Mr. Tenney would have loved once again to have seen the utter glory of the foliage, but the bulldozers were tearing up his land, and the Windsor County Sheriff had come knocking. Mr. Tenney died in the soft light of a farmhouse without electricity, a man who had done nothing wrong, just wanted to stay in the place he loved. His death, I think, constituted an eloquent statement, testified to the fact that we are here today. Before I close, let me say that being involved in this memorializing effort has been a pleasure, particularly because I have come to know people who knew Romaine Tenney, members of the family, and they are all, let me tell you, Vermonters, the best of Vermont. Their invitation to me to speak here today is one of the great honors I've ever known. So it is good and proper what Mr. Tenney's people are doing, making sure that something of what happened just up that hillside is marked and noted. Let us be certain that something of his story abides. In the words of one of my great Civil War heroes, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, let us mark the place where the Tenney farm was, quote, in the hope that reverent men and women from afar and generations we know not of, heart-drawn to see where and by whom great things were suffered and done for them, shall come to ponder and dream, end quote. And perhaps a gentle presence shall reach across the years, perhaps across the stars even, and in some way touch them. More than half a century ago, Romaine Tenney's friends and neighbors gathered here in Ascutney to say goodbye, in a place where people gather every Sunday to worship a man of peace who gave his life for mankind. Mr. Tenney, thank you for who you were. Thank you for what you did. I recall words surely still familiar in that house down the road. Words from a favorite old hymn. All who are weary, come home. Come home. And lastly, let me say, for want of any better words I can think of for Romaine Tenney, let me say, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Coffin. That was wonderful. It's just exactly what I was hoping for. Just a couple of reminders. If you need the bathroom, we have a bathroom right behind me. Help yourselves. There's also a cake that we had made in there. If you guys want to get a picture of the cake before we cut it later, we had it done over in Claremont at Simple Sweet Creations, and they did a fabulous job. There's also cake pops for the kids, but I think we should have them eat first, real food. And you should too. We have some hot dogs being grilled up, and there's food over there, munchies, drinks, help yourself, please. Stay hydrated in the heat. Next up, we have a poet that, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago, I was Googling Romaine Tenney just to see if there had been anything new published besides what the library was putting out, and I came across this book that had come out in April, and the person who co-wrote it with a photographer was doing small book tours, and I contacted Neil and I said, we're doing this event, I don't know if you're free, would you be interested in coming and speaking for us? And he said, absolutely. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Neil Shepard and his book. It's called Vermont Exit Ramps. Yes. So everyone, Neil Shepard.
Thanks, Nancy, for inviting me to this Romaine Tenney celebration. It's wonderful to see some of his extended family here and a good crowd. I came to know about Romaine Tenney during a poetry project that I'd undertaken a few years ago to write about Vermont's gorgeous highways and the exits leading from them to nearby hillsides and pastures, to rural farms and small towns. And the book was called Vermont Exit Ramps, which is over there next to Howardsburg. My co-pilot on this venture, Tony Redsick, who was born and raised in Rutland, he was an old college friend and a talented photographer, and as we were driving and stopping to record life along the interstates through the pen and the camera lens, it was he who told me about an essay he'd read in Yankee magazine detailing the tragedy of an old-time Vermont farmer who had found himself at odds with Vermont progress in the form of eminent domain and a modernizing highway system. We happened to be passing through the stretch of I-91 near Ascutney, so we took the exit and we pulled into the park and ride situated roughly where Romaine Tenney's farm had been, and we discovered what we thought was one of the old maple trees on his farm, which we dubbed Tenney Maple. Later we found Tenney Hill Road, snapped a photo, and the only thing left to do was to write the poem. I did some requisite research. I read the Yankee magazine article, and despite what Nancy said, I did look at Wikipedia too, and I went to work on the poem. For those of you who don't know poetry from poetry, poets don't work and they don't worry about hugging to the literal factual events. They're not news reporters nor historians, but instead poets try to create some imaginative construct that might get at the larger truths underlying the event. The bulk of the Romaine Tenney poem came to me quickly, but it took another year to complete. And I think it's the strongest and certainly the most evocative poem in this book, and it's the linchpin that really ties together my ideas about Vermont tradition and Vermont progress. So here's the poem. It was written in May as I was driving up and down the highways, recording my thoughts and reactions to various exits on the interstates. Romaine Tenney, May 17th, 2 p.m., full sun, cumulus clouds. Hello, black fly. Thanks for the welcome. Now I know what Romaine Tenney cursed and loved here on Tenney Hill Road. The sting inside blossoming, the black bother at the center of the eye bent on beauty. Tenney knew what was coming, and it came. The interstate that brought the commerce in, and with it, the quick buck and its quick-made and quick-fading values. It didn't value Tenney's enterprise on a hill farm that was collapsing around him. He lived in the mudroom L of his old family home with gingerbread eaves and wraparound porches sagging, lawns and meadows stretching in all directions. In the mudroom, he was closer to his animals, 30 milking cows, 2 teams of workhorses, some sows, goats, 4 herding dogs. He lived for them and for himself as days folded into days, and he daily tilled the soil or tinkered and made the farm hum. He ate simple, oatmeal, biscuits, beans. He drank switchel or spring water. He watched over his fields. He watched the workers up valley gouge the land to make the interstate. He studied a document, eminent domain. He said no to the 10,000 they offered, no to the 13,000 simoleons they said were his last chance. He said, no value you can place on this place that birthed me and gave me my daily bread, my milk and eggs, my purpose on earth. I ain't leaving. You'll have to throw me off. And that's how the sheriff found him when he came with his men on a Friday in September to empty the house and the barns. Tenney was gentle as always, sadly smiling, eyes pooled as he watched the dismantling of whatever it was to have an estate seized by the state. Yes, Tenney knew it was coming, and it came. The highway, that is, whizzing by beyond this park and ride where I stand today, shaded by a Tenney maple, says the plaque, rooted roughly in the middle of his farm, rooted 100 years ago when his kin settled in. Tenney might have winced, smiled at Wally's Road, extending from the park and ride with a sign, private property, no entrance. Tenney tried that once, private property. Little good it did with government bent on progress. It was progress and plain misfortune when a surveyor with the gouging road crew at the end of a long day laying road and right before sunset saw sun glint off the weather vane on Tenney's barn as he squinted down valley for the way forward and said, we'll sight the road there, straight through the middle of that man's farm. Yes, this must have been a sweet piece of land back then. Now it's a 4-lane with a median. Cars going south would have driven straight through his cow barn. Northbound traffic would have run him over in his iron bed. Now this place is nothing, or the saddest spot in Vermont, where a man lived 60 years before he burned it up, burned it down. He loved it all, the land, the animals, the husbandry, never married. He wedded the fields and woodlots. The land was his, and he was the land's. And time had nothing and everything to do with it. Time in which generations could pass without the least change to road or railbed. Time to talk across a roadway or lawn to kith and kin, or to tourists from the cities to the south who sought a real Vermonter, lanky, bearded, wry, with a gentle light in his eyes, a light content with a self-made life, and only himself to praise or blame for a problem and a cure. In 1964, the highway came straight through his home. The sheriff came to move him off the farm. And sometime after midnight in his 64th year, Tenney set loose his animals, set the farm on fire, trudged back to his bed, and closed the door on autumn, bolted it, spiked it shut, loaded the shotgun, and triggered it as the house smoked and blazed. Self-immolation was his only protest. The hillside burned for a night and a day. Afterwards, the road crew worked in a stupor. The surveyor drank, and the state never tendered a note of condolence to his next of kin, never mind an apology. They just progressed. And then there's a postscript from Romaine Tenney, who says, He was born there. He loved the land. He loved farm.